Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to another episode of Meals to Unalive For, where we talk about a true crime case and make a death row meal from scratch. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. I'm on YouTube, Spotify, and of course TikTok, so come find me. Today we're talking about a man named Jack Trawick out of Alabama, and while he was only convicted of 2 murders, he confessed to many, many more, so he could have upwards of 14 victims, but we'll really never know for sure. Jack was born in Birmingham, Alabama on February 18, 1947. He was the second of 2 children in his family. Jack's father was originally from Egypt before his family immigrated from Egypt to New Orleans in Louisiana and then later moved to Alabama. Jack grew up in a middle-class neighborhood and he attended Shades Valley High School as a youth before graduating in 1966 and marrying his high school girlfriend a year later. He also attended Jefferson State Community College but failed most of his grades, so he dropped out to join the Navy. Although Jack was known to get along well with others in his younger years, he was noted to have a violent temper and also had a history of violence against women since his youth and adulthood. Jack had served prison sentences before, having been charged with burglary, impersonating a police officer, kidnapping, making threatening phone calls, breaking and entering, and property destruction. In 1970, he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic with homicidal impulses and was divorced in 1971. Gee, I wonder why. Notably, Jack was arrested in 1980 for phone harassment, centering around calling several women and telling them their husbands were either killed or injured. He was subsequently sentenced to 2 years in prison for 3 counts of impersonating a law enforcement officer. Before being arrested in 1980, he would go on to commit his first murder in 1972. On July 16, 1972, Jack would claim his first victim, 17-year-old Betty Jo Richards in Quinton, Alabama. According to early reports, Richards was found stabbed to death in an alley, and witnesses had reportedly last saw her screaming while she was chased by a white man into an alley before she was discovered dead. I will never understand. You see a 17-year-old girl running for her life into an alley. Why didn't anybody call? Why didn't anybody try to help? I will never understand this. One thing that I will see constantly in true crime is they'll be like, oh yeah, we saw that, but they never call. I will never understand that, and I hope that they feel guilty for not calling. Originally, a 30-year-old man named Thomas G. Barnett was arrested as a suspect, but he was ultimately not charged for the crime. The death of Richards remained unsolved for about 20 years until Trawick confessed to the crime. Trawick confessed that when he was driving around downtown Birmingham, he encountered Richards and hatched a plan to do something to her, and he thus threatened her at knife point, walked her to an alley before lethally stabbing her more than 10 times. Jack would ultimately not be tried for this murder because he was tried for the other 2 murders and convicted and then sentenced to the death penalty. So they decided not to go through the trial for Betty Jo Richards because he was already getting the death penalty. So while it's known that he did unalive her, they didn't convict him of it. On June 17, 1992, nearly 20 years after committing his first murder, Jack would murder 26-year-old Frances Eileen Pruitt, better known as Eileen, in Birmingham, Alabama. At that time, Eileen was estranged from her husband and struggling with a cocaine addiction, and she thus turned to prostitution to sustain her drug addiction. Eileen encountered Jack, who spotted her alone on a sidewalk and picked her up. Afterwards, upon the instructions of Eileen, he drove her to a dirt road behind Hillcrest Hospital, where he stopped the car before stabbing her in the throat with a knife. After killing Eileen, Jack proceeded to mutilate Eileen's body. A total of 57 knife wounds were inflicted on her. The body of Eileen was found by a security guard 2 days after her murder. Prior to the arrest of Jack, Eileen's husband was originally arrested as a suspect before the confession of Jack led to the prosecution dropping all charges against him. One thing that was really sad is that I had a very hard time finding information about Eileen, and the information that I did have was like, oh, she was a prostitute and an addict. It's like, okay, that might be true, but there's more to her than just her addiction and what she did to get by. You know what I mean? It was very sad. They very much focused on these two attributes, but not really anything else. So it was very hard to find really any information about Eileen, and I feel like she deserved better. On October 9th, 1992, 4 months after murdering Eileen, Jack killed 21-year-old community college student Stephanie Alexis Gaunch in Birmingham. Jack first targeted Stephanie by stalking her all the way from a shopping mall to her apartment. As Stephanie was walking from her parking space to her apartment, Jack pulled up along beside her in a van and forced her to enter the van. Stephanie was gagged and tied up by Jack, who drove to a secluded area where he bludgeoned Stephanie in the head with a hammer and subsequently strangled her and stabbed her in the chest with a knife. After murdering Stephanie, Jack disposed of her body by throwing her on the side of the road and also threw out the contents of her wallet. He cleaned the blood from his van at his house. A day after Jack killed Stephanie, the police responded to a missing person report filled out by Stephanie's mother, who found that her daughter did not return home the previous night. An autopsy report showed that the cause of death was strangulation and a fatal 3-inch knife wound to Stephanie's heart. On October 26, 1996, while investigating reports of several attempted abductions of women, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department interviewed Jack as a suspect in relation to those reports. During the second interview, the police asked Jack whether he had any involvement with the murder of Stephanie Gaunch. In a third interview conducted on October 29, 1996, Jack indicated that he knew something about the murder, and in a fourth interview conducted on the same day, Jack confessed to the crime. He was then arrested. He was, of course, sentenced to the death penalty for the murder of Eileen Pruitt and Stephanie Gaunch. Apart from the 3 above victims, Jack additionally confessed to at least 2 murders, which brought the total count to 5 to 14. The police also suspected Jack to be involved in several other murders apart from the ones he confessed to. In one of these Alabama cases, Jack was named a suspect in an unsolved killing of 23-year-old Toni Lim in her apartment in March 1990. In another Alabama case, Jack was suspected to be involved in the disappearance of Dr. Michelle St. Roman, age 26, in June 1991. On top of this, Jack confessed to killing a woman estimated to be about 30 years old in 1978 in Alaska by strangling and throwing the unnamed woman overboard while he was boarding a ferry along the waters between Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and Ketchikan. Jack also strangled a female hitchhiker to death in Oregon in 1978 while accompanying his family members to visit his sister. In a further 2003 confession published on a website devoted to Jack, Jack also admitted to killing several more women in Oregon and Alabama. Some were identified as Dr. Virginia Bryant, Michelle Thomas, and Susan Hill, a woman only known as Kim, and a nameless mother and daughter. However, these claims have never been substantiated. So let's talk a little bit about that website that I mentioned that was dedicated to Jack Trawick. So while he was on death row, he got in contact with a man named Neil O'Connor, who was 23 out of Mont Laurel, New Jersey. So O'Connor decides that he's going to publish a website and put the writings of Jack Trawick on the website for other people to read. And obviously, this very much upsets the family, rightfully so. Neil O'Connor seems to have no remorse over what he's doing. In fact, he goes on to say, I'm going to turn him, Jack, into an international superstar now. I'll make sure of that. And another critic interview, he says, try and stop me. I look forward to it. So he knew what he was doing was hurting people and was wrong, and he really didn't seem to care. Some of the content that was on the site was Jack having an imaginary conversation with his last victim, Stephanie Gaunch. It said, was it really worth it? It was for me. I would do the whole thing again, knowing death row was waiting for me. Watching you die is worth it all. On the second page of the website, Jack writes, Trawick Philosophy 101. Never essay a woman without killing her. Never kill a woman without essaying her. Eventually, an essay female will tell someone. Under the heading, Jack gives a female fan murder advice. Jack says, murder is deliciously delicious, delightful. Trawick tells Britney Spears no security is absolute and then asks her to write him ASAP. So about this letter that he writes to Britney Spears, I can't read you the entire letter because if I do, Big Daddy TikTok or Big Daddy YouTube will get mad at me and will probably take it down. I will read you the parts that I can. Dear Britney Spears, seldom does a talent like yours come along. Your voice could make the angels cry and the devil become pure and sweet. People like Charles Manson would melt his ice-cold heart if he would just let your music flow over him. You truly are a role model for an idol to most adolescent females. You not only touch their hearts, but you give them a reason to celebrate. However, I am a sexually motivated serial killer, and if it were up to me... Pause there. So he goes on to talk about how he would violate Britney Spears, like in very, very graphic detail. Like I said, I cannot say what is in this whole letter, otherwise I'll get in trouble. To end the letter that I can read, it says, just think, the next time you go anywhere, I could be there waiting on you. Before you get carried away about all your security and bodyguards and blah, 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 no security is absolute. Looking forward to our first meeting. Write ASAP. Please send some lingerie photos. In another link, he says he saw the movie Enough with Jennifer Lopez, who plays an abused housewife in the movie who gets revenge on her ex-husband. Jack says that he would like to tie her up and do things to her. He tells O'Connor, you may enjoy seeing her slapped around. Jack also describes in detail how he unalived his victims. So of course, because of all the attention that he was getting, it made people very upset, especially the victims' families, rightfully so. But there was nothing that they could do legally about it because it's protected by the First Amendment. However, the warden of that prison decided to not allow Trawick to send any more raunchy letters to O'Connor. So they did start filtering his mail more so he was not allowed to continue to send letters like that to further the website. And I want to read this quote to give you an idea of more so who Neil O'Connor is, because I feel like this says a lot more about him. He said he runs the site because he has a fascination with serial killers since he was a boy. He said the site also helps alleviate sometimes violent thoughts that go through his head that come with obsessive-compulsive disorder. He said, I've always been an animal lover, O'Connor said in a telephone interview. I have 4 very cute cats. The cutest of the cats, a lot of the time I just think about stomping on it until her eyes pop out of her head. The website, alleviates it a bit. Honestly, if that doesn't tell you who the type of person Neil O'Connor is, I don't know what else will. Also, I tried to find Neil O'Connor, but I couldn't find any distinguishable evidence that the few that I found in New Jersey, if he's even still living in New Jersey, were him. But I was very curious to see if he had been arrested or convicted of any major crimes, but I could not find that information because honestly, I don't think any of us would be surprised if he did something heinous later on. On June 11th, 2009, 62-year-old Jack Harrison Trawick was put to death by lethal injection. Prior to his execution, Jack's last meal consisted of fried chicken, french fries, onion soup, and a roll. Honestly, I was pretty underwhelmed with this last meal. Of course, the fried chicken was good, and I'm not gonna lie, the whole homemade roll was pretty fantastic, but I don't think that I would be thrilled to have this as a last meal overall. I didn't really enjoy the French onion soup. I feel like there are many, many other soups that are superior to French onion, and overall, like, it was just bland, in my opinion. Honestly, I think I would give this meal maybe a 3 out of 10. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't wonderful either. It didn't have a dessert, and it just seemed real bland overall. Also, I had to make some lemon bars because I just simply didn't have enough filming content to go with the audio. So if you're like, what's that about? It's just because I felt like making lemon bars and I needed more cooking content. Anyways, what were your thoughts about this case? Personally, I do feel like he did kill other women. I just don't see that it's likely that he murdered Betty and then waited 20 entire years before he started back up again. I do think that there is some truth to what he's saying. I just wish that we had more information and justice for those women. Let me know down in the comments what you think. As always, guys, please like and subscribe. Find me on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, all the things, and I will see you next week. Bye.